I think I'll go ahead and get started. We may have a few more people trickle in, but I like to get started pretty close to on time anyway. So thank you everyone for here joining us. Ian is out right now, so it's me today. If you haven't met me yet, I'm Jana. I'm Vice President and co-apiary manager. So I am taking over for Ian tonight. So I'm going to get started. Tonight's guest speaker is going to be Matthew Shepard from Xerces Society. Just our little general club business that we usually do every time. If you are joining us and you're not a member, we would love to encourage you to become a member. There's all kinds of membership benefits that we have, and it's only $25 a year. So check out our website and feel free to email any of the board if you've got questions about membership, what it entails, or anything like that. I want to give a plug for our Bee Buddy program. This is a great program that we have. We have it synced up to Google Maps, so you can find either mentors or learners in your area. So you would register yourself as either someone wanting to help new beekeepers or as someone who wants to learn more about beekeeping. And you can see on this little map here that you can see who's near you, and you can, even if you just want to maybe even network with some other new learner beekeepers, you don't have to use it just for finding a mentor or learner. And I would highly encourage you that if you want to learn more, to sign up on that. And if you're more experienced and you'd be willing to mentor some people, we'd love to get more mentors on the list because we have lots and lots of learners. Well, I probably should have taken the apiary stuff out because we're done with the apiary for the year. But we do have a great learning apiary, so we'll start that back up in the spring, probably late February, early March. We had a great, the last couple were really great. We had a winterizing workshop where people brought their hive parts, and we insulated hives, and we learned about winter feeding and stuff. And last week we pulled apivar strips, and we had a party and ate lots of good food. So think about joining us next spring. This is really super important information about our upcoming meetings. Please note that the November meeting and the December meetings are on Thursdays. So they'll be the first Thursdays, not Wednesdays. We're going to be meeting in person, and the venue that we wanted ended up not being available on Wednesday. So we're going to be doing Thursday. So the November meeting is really important. Not only is it a first in person since the pandemic, but we're going to be holding elections. And if you would like to vote in the elections, you have to be at this meeting. We will not be doing virtual voting this year since we're having in-person meeting. We also have a speaker, Mandy Shaw, will be speaking to us, and we'll be having some really cool raffle prizes. So make sure you come. December is going to be really extra fun. It's going to be honey tasting. There'll be kind of like a little bit of a fun competition going on with it. You will have, if you harvested honey this year, please bring a small jar of it, and we'll be sampling honey and voting for what people think is the best tasting. And we're also going to be seeing if you can pick out your own among all the different types of honey that show up. So there'll be prizes, and it'll be lots of fun, just a nice social time. Oh, this is, well, I already just told you all this. Mandy Shaw is going to be talking about the Bee Informed Sentinel Apiary program, having elections, and then December's honey tasting. The January meeting, we're looking for ideas from you guys. Who do you want to hear from? What kind of topics do you want to hear about? So please email me at vice-president@portlandurbanbeekeepers.org. If you've got any ideas, we want this to be all about what you guys want to hear about. So we want to hear from you. Before we do Matthew's talk, Glenn Andreessen from Bridgetown B is here with us tonight, and he's going to do his What's in Bloom report. So I'm going to stop sharing and let him jump on.
I'll bet you I can do that.
I think I've given permission for you.
Okay.
Oops.
Yes.
Yep, there you go.
Okie doke. Let's see, start from the beginning. I said start from the beginning. There we go.
There it is.
Okay. Well, I have something kind of fun to start out with. And that is, which of these animals have never bothered my hive? Okay. Yep. There's a skunk. This is in Northeast Portland. And, you know, they want to eat the bees. That's what they're after, not larvae. So they'll scratch at the opening to get the attention of the bees, and they sure did here. But that's a lot of scratching there. And you can see the hair underneath how really they've padded down. So, been bothered with skunks. Bears, Unfortunately, now this was not in Portland, but this was out near, outside of Sandy in Clackamas County, and just destroyed a couple of hives, tipped over this thick bench, scratched at the bottom board, the opening here, and this just gives you kind of an idea of the size of their scat, and they just ate everything.
Hey, Glenn.
Yeah.
Your voice is echoing a lot on our end. Can you like turn your mic off and back on again, or
maybe
see if we can?
I don't know. Let's see here. How would I do that? Oh, I'm going the wrong direction here.
Yeah, it would have to be on your, it would be your computer. Do you have two computers open?
Yeah, but only one is on. My desktop doesn't have a microphone.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't know. That's okay. Go ahead. We'll just, it'll be fine.
Sorry. I can go fast. All right. So skunks, yes. Bears, yes. Birds. At least the western tanager and blue jays have eaten my bees. Maybe somebody else could chime in with an additional bird. People. This is at Leach Botanical Garden. That's crazy. Yellow jackets. And mice. Yep. Raccoons? Nope. Never been bothered by raccoons. Now, maybe some of the other sides have been, but I haven't had any issues with the raccoons. So that's that. I forget every year, but then I bring up last year's What's in Bloom, and I see I need to update my honey stats here. So here we are this year. I want to get rid of it here. There we go. So you can see this year that my honey production was down from last year, 500 pounds. You know, I had fewer supers, and I had fewer pounds per super. I thought it was pretty good in that for me, I'd rather have fewer supers on and more honey rather than just pile them on and distribute them. So just 1.89 supers here. The highest amount from an overwintered hive this year, 200 pounds, and from a nuke from April, 157. So don't let anybody tell you that you can't get a that nukes don't produce honey. Okay. Now, for this 3-month period here, I'm not doing all of the plants that would attract bees, honeybees, just some of the better ones in my experience. So no annual flowers, but plenty of perennial flowers. I'll whip through these here so Matthew gets plenty of time to talk. The native asters have been great this year. And this is one to consider where irrigation is at a premium. These here along my neighbor's fence here don't get any water. And this has been a tough year, but and yet they're still blooming pretty well. Not as well as if they'd gotten some water though. One of my favorite asters is this little lady in black. Bees find it regardless of where it is. More asters, particularly this time of year rather than December here. Not much coneflower. And maybe not too much garden stage this year, certainly, with the Gabiosa or the geranium. But, this sage here is blooming now and attracting bees. Common weed, but one of my favorites. Long blooming. This is not the native goldenrod, but still attracts pollinators. Some sedum are still blooming now. My echinopsis done. Chums are still blooming and are attractive to our bees. And many of the dahlias. One of my beds, I have about, I'm not sure, maybe 150 dahlias planted. And one of the beds, I didn't get good water to them. And the plants are doing all right, but the blooms are many fewer. So I'm going to change next year to give them plenty of water. And once again, these are the type of dahlias that have open center, all red variety. A few of them. The little wood girl is very attractive to bees and blooms for half the year. Our fuchsias are attracting bees now. Part of what's happening now is that there's just fewer sources, and so maybe these aren't great sources, but they're the only source, so they become a go-to plant. Of course, way early for this, but expected in December. Not too many fruit plants or food plants blooming now, but this loquat is one of them. Will start blooming later this month. Nebraskas, if you let them flower. These will be coming on very soon now. Fatsia. I'll spend a minute or less talking about the Mahonias. This one starts blooming last month, even in September, but they'll really come in bloom now. And then that's followed by a couple of other crosses, Charity and Arthur Menzies, which will bloom in February. And then starting in late February or March will be the native Oregon grape. And so these Mahonias can offer pollen and nectar through the better part of the year. And it's great this time of year. Here comes my cat. There goes my cat. Yeah, there's the Arthur Menzies there in late December, blooming in the fog. But if it's a warmer day, they'll be humming. One of my top 10 plants, bee plant. The viburnum's coming on later. These are still showing some blooms now, but mostly done. Weigela. A lot of crepe myrtles, although I don't see a tremendous number of bees on them, but they will visit them. There you go. Heaths and heathers will be coming on later. One of my favorite early winter plants is silverberry. So-called because the underneath side of the leaf is very silver in color. Our thumb peas that will attract bees, trees, but it's still blooming in some parts of the neighborhood here, the clerodendron. Very fragrant tree. Chinese elm. Not many of these around. Another one of my top 10 bee plants, the seven sunflower, which is maybe a little bit still blooming now, but I just really like the way the tree is kind of billowy and open. A few herbs, some thyme still going, oregano. Borage, probably someday I'm going to make it a plant that will bloom every month of the year. Can bloom. Russian sage still some blooming now too. So cover crops, the cilia could be blooming now if you planted it late. Same with wheat and plenty of weeds, including mullein and ivy. Jeremiah sent photos here just within the last 20 minutes, and bees are very attracted to ivy. Unfortunately, it's terrible tasting honey and even smelling honey. But if they're using it just to make more bees, then so be it. Like that. And another plant bloom every month of the year. It's going to the end of many of these. Just like we're at the end of this. Well, these are posted at the Bridgetown Bees website, and if you have ideas for other plants, send them my way. That's it. I'll stop sharing, and we'll send it over to either Jana or Matthew. Has Jana gone to sleep on us? Matthew, I see you're still muted, but there you go.
Yeah, I'm still moving. I think Jana is frozen, unfortunately.
Oh, so you can't share your screen?
Well, I can share my screen. I didn't know whether there was whether Jana wanted to say anything else, but I can.
Yeah, well, it looked like it was in there too. So rather than having dead air.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I can just dive in and keep going.
Okay.
That's no problem. Thank you for that.
Okay,
That was,
thanks.
yeah, no, it's really interesting to see all the flowers that are in bloom at the moment, and that kind of complements what I'll be talking about a little later, because I don't dive into plants in quite so much detail just because there's so much to cover.
Yes.
So that was really good. So thank you for that. Yeah. Well, I will just assume Jana wants me to continue, so I shall. Well, yeah, so good evening, everybody. My name is Matthew Shepherd. I work for the Xerces Society for Invertebrate Conservation. We're based in Portland. but work nationwide and Canada and elsewhere. So I have been working at Xerces for more than 20 years now, and involved with pollinator conservation for that entire time. My work has focused on native bees and butterflies and others, but mostly native bees for that period of time. And it's going to be native bees that I will be talking about primarily this evening. I'm going to share my screen and see if I can launch this successfully. Hopefully now that works and you can now see my screen. So yeah, so I was asked to come and talk about bee conservation. Ian, who's unfortunately not here, although I say unfortunately, but I mean, it's exciting for him. Those are great days to have a small kid in the house. But he'd asked me a few questions, and I have one or two questions that I think he was hoping I was going to answer, but I haven't been able to. But I will come to that in a little later. So yes, so the Xerces Society, we are an environmental nonprofit. Oh, I see Jana's moving again. That's all right. I just kept going. So you're on mute, Jana.
Hi, sorry.
No, that's fine.
Yeah, okay. Anyway, go ahead. I'm glad you figured out that I was frozen, so.
It's either though you were like holding your breath and just playing statues. So yeah, all right. Well, thank you. Yeah, the Xerces Society, we're named after the Xerces blue butterfly, which is one of the first insects known to go, in fact, recorded to going extinct in North America because of human activity. Used to live in the San Francisco Peninsula, but as that city expanded, particularly towards the ocean, then its habitat disappeared. And this photograph on the left there, it's the only book I know of that features the Xerces blue from that era, and it's from 1927, Comstock's Butterflies of California. But we are an environmental nonprofit, and our focus is on protecting the natural world through the conservation of invertebrates and their habitat. We do that through hands-on conservation, through advocacy, through research, and also through education and outreach. And we are a membership organization with 13,500 plus, probably more than 14,000 members now scattered around the world. And although we've grown in the time that I've been here from a handful of staff to more than 70 now, we still, Xerces as an organization is much bigger than that. So we have volunteers who do outreach, community science volunteers who gather data, the support of private foundations, scientists who support our research and make sure that the information we present is accurate. We get funding from private foundations and business partners, federal agencies, all sorts of people who support our work either through funding or through partnership on projects. I'll talk a little bit about the diversity of pollinators. Obviously, pollinators, the great majority of pollinators are insects, although there are some fairly big pollinators around. Mammals, birds, in this country, bats and hummingbirds are the main non-insect pollinators. But the majority of pollinators are insects. Going from the top left, obviously butterflies and moths are one of the groups. There's flies on the top right, beetles on the bottom left, wasps, and then bees, and bees are the most important group of pollinators in this country. And you probably know this because they collect and transport pollen. They do forage in an area around a nest, which means that they constantly go out and work that area, collecting and moving pollen very efficiently. And then they're also good at pollinating because of something that I don't know what, I doubt bees have a name for it, but it's what people call flower constancy. And that means that once they have been to a flower of one species, they go to the flower of the same species again and again and again. Basically, they've figured out how to effectively and efficiently collect the nectar and pollen from that flower, and they'll keep going. And the reason why that's so good is because that means that the pollen is moved efficiently and effectively from one bloom to another of that same species. Some of the other pollinators move pollen, but they don't necessarily constantly travel from flower to flower of the same species. And if the pollen doesn't get to the right species, then it's not going to pollinate. And I'm sure you realize that honeybees are not typical bees living in a hive, making honey, having a caste system, having tens of thousands of bees in the nest, making the honey to try and keep the hive alive during periods without bloom, a queen who spends her time laying, and all these different features of the hive society and behaviors of honeybees are not typical. And this may not be a typical person either, although maybe in this group it is more typical. But I show this slide in a lot of places, and it always gets a kind of a squirm from people. Now, honeybees, European or the Western honeybee, it's hugely important for crop pollination. And beekeeping industry is afflicted by diseases, pests, all sorts of problems. But despite what you might read in the media, honeybees are not endangered in the way that some other bees are. And as you probably realize, they're not native to this country. They were brought here by European settlers. And the last figure I saw, there's around about 2.7 million hives in this country. So despite all the problems that honeybees are facing, and that I'm sure you're very aware of, they're not endangered in any particular way. Moving from honeybees to look more broadly at bee diversity. In the United States, there are a little over 3,600 species of bees. In Oregon, the best figure we have currently is 650, but I think everybody is expecting that to rise probably closer to 800 by the time the surveys and all the information is pulled in. In Portland, I would guess 100 to 150, but it may well be higher than that in terms of species in the city. Toronto is known, for example, Toronto in Canada has more than 300 species of bees in that city. It's a bigger city, but it's also in an area of the continent which has generally lower diversity. And in a single garden, I would not at all be surprised to find that you have 30 or 40 species of bees. That's the number based upon my own small garden in the western suburbs. And there have been some surveys done, and there's at least one garden that we know of in Portland that has more than 80 species of bees in it, which is a quite shocking diversity when you think about it. Now, these bees, I'm sure we recognize bumblebees. They're the easy ones. If you say to someone, what does a bee look like? They'll probably describe something that looks a bit like a bumblebee, fat, hairy, black and yellow. And that is pretty good for most bumblebees. We do have around these parts some bumblebees that aren't black and yellow. There are 2 or 3 species that have really bold orange markings on them. And so even once you start looking at bumblebees, it kind of drifts away from that stereotypical image of the honeybee. Mining bees are one of the bees that are active early in the year. They'll be active maybe as early as January in the year, but certainly February they start appearing in the Portland area, about the size of a honeybee, but rather slimmer and more drab. Most of them are not that exciting to look at. We have mason bees, orchard mason bees, blue orchard bees, lots of different, well, not lots, but several different names for them. These are robust little bees that come out early in the spring, probably out in March. And when people see them, they often think it's a house fly because it has a slightly bluish hint to it. But some mason bees are bright green and smaller. We also have striped sweat bees that smaller than a honeybee, fairly drab, dark brown, almost black, but they do have fairly distinctive stripes to them. We have, again, other bright green bees, metallic green sweat bees that just fly when they catch the sunshine. When they're flying, they just shimmer like a jewel. We also have other sweat bees that are much tinier, and these two photographs are taken on the same flower, and if you look at the flower structure, you can see how this bee dwarfs it, but this bee is just neatly wrapped around it, and these bees are 1/4 of an inch or 1/8 of an inch in length, and you often don't see the individual bees, you just kind of see the movement. Other tiny bees include the small carpenter bees that nest in plant stems. We have leafcutter bees that carry the pollen on stiff hairs on the underside of their abdomen, so they can be pretty distinctive when you see them. We have the longhorn bees that come out in summer, where the males have these extraordinarily long antennae, hence their name. But the females don't have such long antennae, and in some ways look a bit more like a honeybee, but sometimes they're really cute and hairy, and some people have referred to these as teddy bear bees because they are just so fluffy, and you want to get up and pet them. So that was just a very quick scamper through some of the diversity of the bees that we have around here. To look a little bit about their natural history, I mean, how do they nest? What their life cycle is, what kind of habitat needs do they have. The life cycle of our native bees is the same as the honeybee. You have an adult, you have an egg, you have the larvae, you have the pupae, and then you have the adult again. And in the case of these bees, that entire life cycle takes a year. The adults will be active for 3 or 4 weeks. Some species are a little longer than that. And of course, when you're talking about 3,600 species, there's no like absolutes. I can't say, gosh, an adult bee will live for this long, and so this is generalized just as an example. And this particular example is of a mining bee. It nests in the ground, while the female is active for those few weeks. She'll dig in the ground, make some brood cells, do the foraging, supply the brood cell with food, lay an egg on it, which you can see in the center on the right hand of the center there. And then she seals that cell, and she'll never actually have any contact with her offspring. The egg will hatch within a week. The larvae will grow, probably just a couple of weeks, maybe 3, living in that cell, eating the food, and then it will pupate and transform into the pupa, and it will remain in that pupal form dormant for the rest of the year, and will emerge at the same season that the mother bee was active. Now, of our native bees, roughly 70% of them are like that mining bee and nest in the ground. Some of them will dig out a nest that's just 4 or 6 inches deep. Some will go down 10, 12, 16, 18, 24 inches. And it really is a remarkable amount of engineering and effort that goes into this. The bees generally prefer sandier soil, but with such diversity, you'll find some that like clay, some that like, there are in this country, there are some bees that like to nest in sandstone, believe it or not, and they will actually dig through sandstone to make their nests. But most of them like sandier, loamier soils. And you know, in their 3-4 weeks, they might make 1 cell a day, laying 1 egg each day. And so by the end of that time, they'll have laid maybe 3 dozen eggs. About another 30% of our native bees need a tunnel. Most of these need their own an existing tunnel that they can divide up into a series of brood cells. But there are some like the small carpenter bee, and there's also the large carpenter bee that doesn't occur in the Portland area, but some parts of Oregon, if you go south, has the large carpenter bee, and they will actually chew out their own tunnel down the center of a soft stem. Now these bees, they divide that tunnel up using some kind of material. And the 2 examples I have here in the diagrams, the upper one is a leaf cutter bee. And it cuts neatly trimmed pieces of leaf that it stitches together with its mandibles and a bit of saliva, and then in that brood cell leaves the food, lays the egg, seals the cell, and then carries on working down those tunnels. And the lower example is a mason bee, which, as its name suggests, makes masonry walls, so it collects wet mud and then makes the walls, puts the food in, lays the egg, seals the cell, and keeps working down the tunnel. And so the other thing that these bees, whether they're ground nesting, or some of the ground nesting ones, this is a leaf cutter that I say, you know, with so many bees, they don't follow neat rules. There are some leaf cutters that will occupy holes in the ground. But these tunnel nesting bees do need materials, leaf pieces, mud, resin, soil, pebbles, all sorts of different things that they might collect. And then the other group of sort of nesting styles are our bumblebees. They are the only, well, not quite the only, but the bee that we know best as a communal bee and will live in a small colony. It's an annual colony, so the queens will mate at this time of year, go into hibernation, and then emerge in late winter, and will start life as a solitary bee, trying to create a small colony. And she'll occupy an existing hole mostly. It may be tumble down under grass, it might be an abandoned chipmunk's nest, it might be under a pile of sticks. She'll find a suitable cavity and then make little waxen balls shaped cells and start with a few eggs, and that she lays and tends herself. And then once that first brood has emerged, they will become, you know, her worker bees effectively, and will help the foraging, and she'll forage. And then gradually, as the colony gets bigger, the queen will spend less time outside the nest and more time tending things inside. And most of our bees, our bumblebees around here, they don't get really big nests. You know, if they have 80 or 100 bees by late summer, that would be a really big nest, and most of them are much smaller than that. And then the other thing that bees need obviously are flowers, and with so many different species of bees, many of them have very particular flowers that they require specialist bees, and maybe as many as a quarter of the species of bees are specialists that will collect pollen from maybe one species, or maybe a closely related but small group of flowers. And then there are others like bumblebees that are foraging all year and will be able to forage from a wide range of flowers. And there are some great books out there if you want to learn more about the native bees. Attracting Native Pollinators has a series of profiles about groups and genera of bees. The Bees in Your Backyard is a fantastic book, very readable, rock solid science, and will introduce you to all sorts of bees and behaviors. And then Thor Hansen's Buzz is just an easy read that explores all sorts of aspects of bees and pollination and conservation. And it's conservation that I'm going to dive into now. The reason why I like to talk a bit about the diversity and the natural history is because if we're going to be protecting and supporting and providing for our native bees, it's good to know what they need. And I know, and I'm not saying this to try and upset anybody, but when it comes to bee conservation, beekeeping isn't necessarily bee conservation. You know, there are lots of reasons for having honeybees. But for bee conservation, it's not really, I mean, I come across these people want to have a hive because they're going to save the bees. And having a hive is not going to do anything to habitat. And if we want to save the bees, if we want food for the honeybees, if we want to support all our native bees, we really need to be focusing on habitat. And that's why, you know, if you want bee conservation, we need to be providing for the bees, and we need to provide the habitats to sustain the entire life cycle. And that means they need secure nest sites for our native bees because they're going to be in that nest for a year. And so if that nest site gets destroyed after 6 months, that's the end. Those bees won't make it. They need flowers for foraging, and our native bees could be active anytime from February through to October or maybe even November if the weather stays nice. And pesticide-free environments, because, you know, as you know, insecticides can be devastating to bee populations. And we do that by protecting existing areas and by creating and enhancing new areas. When it comes to natural areas where, you know, nature parks, creek corridors, you know, these are the foundational areas that we should be protecting and maintaining, because they have native ecosystems remaining in them. They have native plant communities. Around here we have some amazing prairies that just bloom in the spring and the early summer. And these are the areas that we should be holding on to because, you know, they support significant populations of pollinators that can move out into the other areas. But when we start looking around our towns and cities, we find we have all sorts of other little areas, whether that's roadsides or parks or, you know, the corners of school playing fields or rooftops or bioswales or power line easements or riparian areas and even in our gardens as well. And all of these small areas combined, if they're thoughtfully managed, can support significant areas of habitat. And one reason small areas of habitat work fine is because bees fly. And I know that seems like a silly thing to say, but it means that they can get from an area with a nest to an area with a flower. Most of our native bees don't fly anything like the distance of a honeybee. Bumblebees, you know, big bees can fly further, you know, quarter mile, half a mile, maybe a mile. But in general, the distance a bee flies is related to its size. And if you've got a bee that's like 1/8 of an inch long, and some bees are even smaller than that, like 1/10 of an inch long, they're not going to fly very far. They may fly 100 yards or less. City blocks in Portland are 200 feet. And so you may have bees that will, you know, that will never get more than a block distance from where they nest. And so that's the reason why small areas of habitat are good, but partial habitats, i.e., you know, plants in one place, nesting in somewhere else. All these little areas can help to contribute to support bees throughout our neighborhoods. And, you know, this is just a visualization of what that might look like to a bee. The pink dotted line is a cavity nesting bee. The green dotted line is a ground nesting bee. And obviously they're not entirely separate. You know, they're overlapping, but this is just an illustration. And so you have the place where they nest, and then they'll find flowers. It may be a lawn, it may be a little natural area, it may be a roadside, it could be a community garden or a flower border. All these little patches together go up to provide the complete habitat. So bee nest sites may be a bigger constraint on bee populations in urban areas than flowers. And that's because many of the natural nesting areas are done away with because they're considered to be an eyesore or they're considered to be dangerous. So, snags, dead trees, wherever we can hold on to those, we should. Same with bare ground. I mean, people often see bare ground and they just see it as a wasteland. And so they want to, put turf on it or concrete it or whatever, cover it up so it doesn't look ugly. But those areas are so profoundly important to, many and the majority of our bees. And so these areas don't have to be spectacular. In fact, that site on the lower right, on the lower left there, that bare ground, we found 8 species of bees nesting in that site. So an unassuming area can be really important. And it doesn't need to be a big area. This is a corner of my yard, and it's about 8 inches between the edge of the concrete driveway and that lump of basalt. And you'll see just under the edge of that basalt, there's the nests. And there are ground nesting bees that just moved in and started digging and nesting in there. We can also, where we can't retain snags, it is possible to introduce artificial snags. I mean, bee nesting blocks you can buy in garden centers, but you can also make your own. Drill holes between 3/16 and 3/8 inch diameter, make them 4 to 6 inches deep. That's a good depth. If you can get deeper than that, that's great. You can also use hollow stems such as common reed or bamboo and just bundle them up. With those stems, you'll find that they have nodes, i.e. lumps around them, and that typically is where the stem is blocked off, and then the stem is hollow above that. So you just cut it and make it as long as you can. And these things do get occupied. And they're simple things that we can be doing to introduce the kind of holes, the kind of features that bees need in our developed landscapes. And nesting blocks really do work. It's one of the satisfying things that when you put one in, you fairly quickly begin to see it being occupied. And that one at the top there, that's a commercially made block. And it's been occupied by one of the leafcutter type bees, because every one of those holes has been sealed with chewed up leaf. And the one down at the bottom there is a mason bee, and you can see all of those bamboo canes have been occupied. And then these features, these blocks will also support more than just bees, because we have wasps and there's the yellow jacket or the hornets that people revile and rail against. But in the same way that most bees are solitary nesting, most wasps are solitary nesting and will occupy the same kind of habitats. And so that's a block on the left, and those pieces of grass sticking out, that's a wasp called a grass carrier wasp, and it feeds its offspring and supplies its nest primarily with tree crickets. And now on the left, that's a great golden digger wasp, a rather beautiful wasp, just dug into the ground. This was a school playing field, and you can see again it goes for tree crickets, which it seems really rough on tree crickets, but just these 2 examples happen to prefer those for their prey. You can make nest blocks for bumblebees. They're less particular. They don't need a certain size of block. But if you make a box that's about 8 inches cube, put a little bit of soft, it could be upholsterer's cotton, it could be dry moss, it could be short trimmed up pieces of string or wool, but a little bit of nesting material makes them happier. A entrance pipe, that's 3-inch plastic water pipe there. You could use a hose pipe, something like that, that just kind of replicates the sense of crawling into a mouse nest, and then tuck that away in an undisturbed corner somewhere, and there's a chance that bumblebees will occupy it. But probably only 1 in 4 or 1 in 5 of these boxes ever get occupied. So it can be a fairly significant investment of time and energy for not that much return on nesting. And on the whole, it seems that bumblebees find their own tumble down, untidy corners and their natural areas. So you're probably better off creating untidy areas where chipmunks can nest, for example, and then the bumblebees will occupy those. Moving on to the kind of the second important thing that bees need for conservation is forage patches. And obviously plants bloom everywhere, but not all of them will be as equally good for either for native bees or for butterflies. And again, like with nests, wherever we can retain existing, create new, but it's worth noting that locally native plants are better for our local native bees. When choosing plants, there are lots of things to consider. Color, bees don't really see red color, so red flowers against foliage, the way the bee eye works is that red and green are the same receptor. So red flower against green leaves is really difficult for a bee to see. So they don't really see red, but they see yellow, white, blue, and ultraviolet as well, because they have a good color vision, a spectrum probably almost as wide as ours, but it's shifted away from the red and into the ultraviolet. There's also a nice diversity of flowers. Again, with so many different bees, they have different foraging preferences, and sometimes that's the shape of the flower, sometimes that's the species. So a good diversity of flowers in bloom at one time is advantageous. Bloom period, as I say, we might have mining bees out in February, and the same with bumblebees in February, and we still have bees active at the moment. So if we can be providing bloom at least from February through to October and into November, which is 10 months of the year, then we can support our native bees, and particularly the bumblebees, which will be active for that entire time. At this point of the year, the bumblebee, most of the colony has died, and it's the queens who've emerged from the final brood of the annual colony that are fattening up and getting ready for hibernation. I've already said that native species are better for native bees, and there is some studies that have been done that show that it's markedly better. And also, given that we have about 1/4 of our species that are specialists, if we're not providing the native species that they need, then they won't have anything to rear their young on. Drought tolerance. We're all wrestling with climate change and shifting weather patterns now. I mean, goodness, who would have expected us to be almost almost a week into October, and we've still got 80-degree days, almost a week of 80-degree days ahead of us, and no real sign of rain here. So we are, encouraging people to think about plants that are better able to cope with minimal water. And sometimes that means native plants, and sometimes we're beginning to experiment with, okay, this is a great plant that naturally grows in Eugene or Ashland, but doesn't really grow here. So is it worth experimenting with that native plant up here in the Portland area, something that'll do better with drier, hotter summers? And then the landscape context, that's this partial habitats thing. If you can look around and you may have willow plants in bloom on the ditch side, half a block from you, and that's your early bloom. So is there a gap in the bloom after that? What can you grow to begin to fill out, make sure there's bloom in your neighborhood for the bees all year? And just to give you a sense of a quick look at some of the good plants for our bees in this area, from left to right, it kind of follows the season. So we have Oregon grape Glenn was talking about the, some of these other ones, and he mentioned the early bloom of the native one, and that's the tall Oregon grape there. And also willow. Willow is a really important, very early season forage source for mining bees and bumblebees. Then we get into spring and moving towards summer, and lupins are great. Steeplebrush hardhack is another good one. Pearly Everlasting, for a moment I'm like, what's that plant called? Pearly Everlasting is a good summer one. And then we get into the asters later in the year, and at the bottom there, that's beggartick. That's a great plant around wetlands. If you're walking in your park anywhere near wetlands at the moment, they're yellow, and that's the yellow that's in bloom. And then at the bottom there, there's a thistle. And I know thistles are considered to be weeds, and I would not encourage someone to grow a Canada thistle or a bull thistle or a milk thistle. But our native thistles have been caught up in that dislike of thistles and the need to get rid of them. And yet native thistles are an incredibly rich source of nectar in the summer, particularly into the late summer. And so if you can get hold of native thistles, they're well worth growing. And then there are some great non-native garden plants, either native to the eastern United States, like the purple coneflower at the top there, that can be great sources of nectar. And then some that also are from further afield. That's at the bottom, that's French lavender, or sometimes people call it Spanish lavender. That's a European plant, but it's an ace nectar source that will support bumblebees and mason bees and small carpenter bees and others in the latter part of spring and moving towards summer. It's worth choosing them carefully because unfortunately in the process of developing and hybridizing and creating new varieties, some of our new varieties of plants have lost the ability to produce nectar or pollen. And that's just because of the way that the genetics of the flower works, is that you add more petals to a flower, and that means you do away with stamens and anthers. And so some of these have inadvertently, the breeding has led to plants that might look glorious but are barren when it comes to feeding bees. And so it's a very simple guide. If you can avoid double flowered varieties, these marigolds here, these are double flowered. They just have way more petals and little else to offer. And there is some research being done, and we are beginning to get a better grasp on some of the particular cultivars. But in general, older varieties of plants seem to be better. And then we can also look to our lawns to provide some forage for bees. I know that I would never win like the Home Depot Man of the Year award for my lawn because it does not look green most of the year, and it's full of what most people would consider to be weeds. But even by not tending it according to all the guides that you read, I've got 6 or 8 species of flowers that now bloom in my lawn and do provide a little bit more nectar, a little bit more pollen, and help to support bees. And then pesticides. I'll talk about pesticides just for a few minutes here. I'm sure I don't really have to talk much. You're all beekeepers, so I'm assuming that you're avoiding insecticides and doing all you can already to keep your landscapes and your gardens safe for your bees. And this is some of these products, the neonicotinoids and other systemics, are just so ubiquitous they're incredibly effective for what they're designed to do, which is to kill insects and to kill insects that try to chew or suck from plants. But in doing that, the toxins are now expressed in nectar and pollen, sometimes at a level that directly kill bees, and other times at a level that just affect behaviors like navigation skill or foraging efficiency or the ability to create nests and lay eggs. So lots of different ways in which the presence of insecticides in our environment are impacting and reducing our bee populations. And most of these products have a bee warning label, and you can read it. And it's great. It's a nice step forward, and it might make some people feel happier and more secure in using them. But the reality is that most of that guidance doesn't benefit our native bees. It's based upon honeybee biology and the ability to, cover a hive or close a hive, or all these different things that you might be able to do with a managed insect like a honeybee hive, which don't bear any relevance to our native wild living bees. And unfortunately, these systemics, it's a displaced problem, because you may not be applying insecticides yourself, but you could be buying plants that were treated in a nursery weeks or months ago. And then when you take it home, you bring it home with that insecticide. Increasingly now, it's possible to find plants that have been grown without neonicotinoids in particular, or in some cases without major pesticides or insecticide applications. And so we always encourage people to try and seek out nurseries that grow things sustainably, nurseries that avoid neonicotinoids, and are producing what we have started calling bee-safe nursery plants. And then, of course, if you're creating this wonderful habitat for bees, you're also going to be creating an amazing habitat for other insects, whether that's butterflies, or whether that's lady beetles, or solitary predatory wasps, or syrphid flies, that are munching their way through aphids. And so you'll find that by the time that you stop using or avoid using pesticides, you're going to be creating over time a more balanced environment that will look after itself. So when you get that sudden population of aphids, wait a week, wait for the lady beetles to come along, wait for the syrphid flies to turn up, and they will eat their way through those aphids remarkably efficiently. And then just to wrap up here, we have our Bring Back the Pollinators campaign and pledge. And if you go to bringbackthe-pollinators.org, you'll find a lot of information, local plant lists, more guidance on habitat management, et cetera, and also the Pollinator Protection Pledge, which is based upon the 4 principles, 3 of which I've been talking about: flowers, nest sites, and avoiding pesticides, but also sharing the word, because it's a really powerful thing if one neighbor talks to another about how to manage gardens. We also have the Bee City USA initiative. Xerces didn't create it. This was Phil Stiles who created it in North Carolina just 10 years ago. But she was looking to retire and approached us. And then we said, yes, of course, we would be thrilled to take it on, because it's such an amazing initiative. And so we've been running it since 2018. And it's a chance for not just for individuals to do things in their own yard, but for an entire community to get together. We have the city and also a campus version for college universities and so on. And, again, creating habitat, not avoiding pesticides, and doing outreach are the requirements. And it happens that Portland is not a Bee City affiliate. We have more than 300 affiliates across the country in 45 states, and right around Portland, as far as I remember, it's West Lynn, Wilsonville, Tualatin, Hillsborough, and Sandy, I think, are the affiliates locally. But Portland itself hasn't got an affiliate. It's not something that we do. We don't go in and say, hey, let's create an affiliate. It's all driven by local community and the local folks, and we support and provide expectations and resources. And then there's community science that you can get into. Even iNaturalist is a fantastic way of finding out what you've got and contributing sightings to. We have a bigger, better idea of what's happening and which insects, which bees are where, what plants they're using, et cetera, et cetera. We have books from Xerces Society that will provide more information. The Xerces website, xerces.org, you can go there and download lots of different fact sheets, plant lists, conservation guidelines, etc., etc. Because I realize I've thrown information, and I'm sure that you'll want to spend time delving a bit more deeply and thinking more about it. If you don't like reading, you can go to YouTube and you'll find the Xerces YouTube channel, and we have webinars of all sorts there now. You can also follow us on social media, and we share new resources, hints, tips, information. We are a donor-supported non-profit, so if after this you think you'd like to support us, that would be wonderful. And that's the end. Thank you for your patience. I hope I haven't taken up too much time, as I'm very happy to answer questions and continue the conversation.
Thank you so much, Matthew. That was really interesting. I learned a ton.
Thank you.
I have a lot of questions, but
Yeah.
I'm going to open it up to the rest of the group first. I won't be selfish with the time, so I'll see if anyone else has questions. If anyone has a question, feel free to unmute yourself and ask, or if you would prefer, you may put it in the chat and I will ask it for you. All right, well then I'm going to get started with my questions, but I want to make sure everyone else can feel free to pop in with any of theirs. I know that I saw in your pictures some of those bees were really amazing looking, like the sweat bees that were metallic green, or the bluish ones and stuff. And I'm wondering if there is a specific flowers that they love to go to that I could put in my yard to attract.
Yeah, that's a great question. And sweat bees are fairly broad in their plant choices. It's probably one of the reasons why they're doing fairly well compared to some other bees, and so they're still a bee that we see around. So I mean, they go for sunflowers, they go for asters at this time of year, certainly for some of the sweat bees, but some of them, they're more of a summer plant. I mean, a summer bee, so that's the main focus. So that's things like sunflowers. Black-eyed Susans are another one that's not native, but which they love. And I'm scratching my head because I mean, yeah, some of the other ones I had on the screen, they would go for too. And I'm thinking, gosh, if only I had a list right here in front of me that I could just reel off. But I mean, they are, as I say, there's a lot of different plants that they go to. And so the chance, if you have flowers, you'll probably see them.
Okay, well, I'll just have to keep my eyes open more. I've got lots of natives, so let's keep looking at them.
Great.
A question in the chat says, do bumblebees ever requeen a nest during the summer?
Yes and no. I know there's never a simple answer, is there? The queen that founded the nest, if she dies, there's a chance that one of the other females, because her offspring, you know, that they're female through most of the broods through the year, and there's always a bit of sneaky egg laying by the other females in the nest, but the queen generally has control of the nest. So if she died, it probably would happen that another one or some others of the females in the nest would start laying eggs. The thing is that those are not mated, because the mating happens at the end of the year, because for most of the bumblebee colonies time, it's only females, because, you know, as I'm sure it's like the same with honeybees, but with a native bees, you know, once the female has mated, she's able to retain the sperm, and then as she lays an egg, she if she doesn't fertilize it, it becomes male, and if she does fertilize it, it becomes female. So the female bees that have been born as one of the broods in that nest have not mated, so they can only lay male eggs. So it's kind of a limited, at that point, it's relatively limited what could happen in that nest. The other distinct time when a bumblebee nest could be requeened is because there are a number of bumblebees that do not make their own nest. They're known as cuckoo bumblebees. And so once a queen emerges from hibernation, from overwintering, she does not make her own nest. She finds an existing nest established by a different species and will go in and will fight to the death with the queen of the founding queen of that nest. And if that cuckoo bumblebee is successful, she will then take over the nest and take over control of the workers and then start laying her own eggs.
Interesting. Another question in the chat. One part of it is, can you show the slide before the Bee City USA? There's a great yard sign that someone would like to get. I think that was the Bring Back the Pollinator sign.
Yeah, no, and you can get that's Circe Society. We produce that sign. So if you go to our website, you'll find a link where you can get it. And we only have it available through the gift center because of tax complications. The IRS makes everything incredibly complicated, and because of tax, we don't sell it as such. We only provide it in exchange for a donation. Because of IRS regulations, we're limited on the donation that's required in order to get it.
Okay.
Make it complicated and difficult.
Yeah. And then another question is, do all the bee species you mentioned live well together, like as in competition for space in an area?
Yeah, they do live pretty well together. I'm not sure how many people have really studied direct competition between native bees. There will be some competition for forage, inevitably. You might find sometimes that bees will kind of barge another bee off a flower if it wants it, but that's relatively minor in terms of competition. So in general, they do live together. Like nesting, if you've got a snag with little tunnels in it, you'll get all sorts of different species of bees that will occupy it. And if you have a bee block, it's not just like one bee or one species of bee necessarily that will occupy it. There's lots of different species that you might find. And the same if you have a patch of ground in soil access, multiple species of bees will be nesting in that space. And some of the ground nesting bees will nest at incredible densities. I didn't linger too long, but one of the photographs showed lots of little mounds of dirt in grass. And that was a mining bee site that had bees nesting at densities of 20 or 30 bees per square foot. And that's every bee has its own individual nest entrance in that area. So they seem to get along pretty well on the whole.
That's great. So along those lines, I know that you mentioned that a lot of the bees like soil that has some sand in it.
Mm-hmm.
I pretty much have clay in my yard. So if I want to provide that kind of habitat, should I like mix some sand into some soil in one area, or just let them find their own spot?
I think the best thing is to let them find their own spot. And that partly reflects the fact that for most of the bees, we don't know in any great detail what kind of soil they prefer. Again, 70% of 3,600 is like 2,500 species, and most of those have not been investigated in terms of soil preferences and so on. And obviously, if you just look at Portland or just Oregon, it's a smaller number. But again, there's just not enough people looking to really understand. And although the evidence that we have that's being compiled from as many different studies that there are suggests that bees do typically go for soil that is higher with sand or loam. But if we're in an area that naturally has clay soils, then that's going to be the soil that our local bees are adapted to. That said, if you wanted to try and make an area that was sandier, for sure you can dig a hole, mix sand in, or you could have a sand pile. I don't know what the magic mix is that they put into baseball diamonds in schools, but they're really popular with mining bees as well in some places, and that's must be some kind of a clay sand mix. But I've seen schools with baseball diamonds with thousands and thousands of bees nesting in them, which always freaks out the parents. But these mining bees, and I'll go back to mining bees just briefly, because in Portland, goodness, I should be able to remember the name of the school, but there's an elementary school that's actually adopted mining bees as their school mascot. And the school calls them tickle bees because they have tens of thousands of them that nest in the school field. And the kids would play with them because they're active for a month or so, or 6 weeks in the spring, and you can walk across the school field and there's just this cloud of knee-level bees going backwards and forwards. And the kids go out there and catch them in their hands, and they say they tickle when you hold them, because mining bees, the stinger is so soft and gentle that it doesn't penetrate human skin, except like the really thin bit of skin on the tip of your nose. So the trick is don't smell mining bees.
Oh, someone in the chat, Glenn, is telling us that
Sabin,
it's
yeah,
Sabin
thank
School.
you. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
the one. I was like, why can't I remember the tickle bees? Thank you, Glenn.
We might not have to take a field trip to the Sabin School in Northeast Portland in the spring.
Yeah.
Someone else is asking, do all the bees you mentioned sting when challenged?
No, not really. I mean, I'm sure you all know from your hives that honeybees are essentially a gentle creature, and you can be in the middle of a mass of them and they're not going to sting you. And it's possibly even more so with the native bees, particularly the solitary bees. If you're a hive bee and there's tens of thousands, then maybe you can sacrifice some to protect the hive. But our solitary bees, they're going to fly, because if there's just one female laying the eggs, if she dies, that's the end. So she will use her stinger if it's if she's really trapped, really cornered, she will use her stinger, but she'll flee as her first response. And also add, since talking about stingers, majority of bees, their stingers are not barbed, so they can sting and they don't get eviscerated like a honeybee does. They don't leave their stinger behind, so they can sting and then fly if needs be.
Do we have any more questions out there? All right, well, I guess we can wrap it up. Thank you so much, Matthew. This has been really, really a great learning experience for me. And there's been several comments in the chat that people have enjoyed it. So thank you so much.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, really appreciate it. All right. Good night, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Good night.